That's great. And that's a wonderful transition point to my next question to you. I want to dig down a little bit more into when we talk about those risks now. So we've had a lot of sort of global language from everyone about, what are the risks involved in AI and not focusing on those doom-based scenarios. But let's talk about specifically what those right now harms can look like. So as we mentioned at the start, and the name of my organization, the Civic Data Cooperative, the reason why we connect data and AI is because you need billions of lines of data in order to build capable AI systems and AI technologies. A very specific example I'm mindful of recently was out of the US. There was an AI system created to predict the risk of poor health outcomes amongst patients, specifically separated by race at their admittance to hospital. And they found bias in the data used to train the system, such that if addressed, the inequity in the health risk score that was assigned to patients would increase the percentage of Black patients receiving additional help in hospital from just 1 in 5 patients receiving additional help to half of them receiving additional help when they're admitted. So that's a huge disparity in how we think about the data that is used to build these systems. So Arna, my question is to you, which is what kind of inequities, this is one example I've given, you gave some around facial recognition and social justice harms specifically, are you most concerned about being reinforced or created by AI technologies?
And there's a whole set, I guess, with some of the research people have been talking about data harms and looking at the set of risks or actual harms that are observable, and kind of there are also media, a lot of cases are being discussed. Discrimination, of course, is a key issue, and you mentioned an example. We mentioned facial recognition. Automated hiring systems have been analyzed to discriminate based on gender and ethnic background and so on. There are cases of it's called predatory pricing, when, for example, a car insurance becomes more more expensive for people living in a neighborhood with a large percentage of minorities, and these kind of things. So there are these forms of data-based and data analysis-based discrimination that are happening. Yes, and there are others. I mean, sometimes these can extend to exclusion from the necessities of life. And I mentioned that actually at the beginning, people have lost access to health, to food stamps, and so on in different countries because there were because the system have used false information. There have been cases of wrongful blacklisting and so on. That ties in and with other concerns around privacy, around surveillance, around exploitation of data that is collected about people. Some people are actually talking now about the exploitation of vulnerabilities, because there's often a focus on kind of trying to find out what characteristics and social traits and people that then can be used for targeted advertising, but also for political messages, and thereby then in a way manipulate, affect people's views. And there's a whole set of outcomes, problematic outcomes that are being discussed and that need to be taken into account. I think in addition to that, or maybe an underlying of that, is also like the issue of and the concern maybe around data analysis being in a way inevitably about discrimination. That's in effect what it does in many ways, to categorize, to sort, to segment, to understand better, or to in a way, to just differentiate service provision, and according to needs, but sometimes also according to other criteria, and we need to be careful about that. And there are some possible outcomes in terms of discrimination. Maybe just this one example. A few years ago, we had a workshop on how different aspects, different areas of government, different sectors of government use data analysis and data systems There was somebody from the London Fire Brigade who said, well, we're using a lot of like data sources, data systems that tell us exactly in which households there is an increased fire risk. And it's fantastic because it allows us then to go specifically in a targeted way there and there and there and talk with them about fire risks. And it's great, it saves lives. And yes, it might. And at the same time then, if you look at the actual categories of the data that are used, yes, there are ethnic categories, there are like socioeconomic categories that are highly discriminatory, leading to forms of discrimination, stigmatization, and so on. And so yeah, there are. It's not an easy, not a simple area. There's not a simple yes or no answer, but there are problematic areas that need to be looked at. Yeah.
I could add a couple more to that. I mean, first off, just bringing our minds to the generative AI moment which we're living in. So one sort of real threat to social justice for me is what we might call or think of, and others have called it this value or cultural lock-in, which is to say, so these systems basically are prediction systems, and so they have a huge data set that's from massive text corpora. So any digital data it's scraped from the internet, it's scraped from anywhere where people have produced digitized data. That's what the data that's training these large generative AI systems are. So the first thing to ask ourselves then is whose data has been recorded, right? Whose data shows up in those data sets? And it's then, I think, it becomes relatively obvious that those who are on the wrong side of digital divides, those who haven't been in places where there's been data produced digitization, connectivity, those peoples, those communities are not sufficiently represented in the data. And so what you have is, right, you ask ChatGPT a question, almost as if it's a kind of a universal brain or like a mind that you can ask it a question like Oracle and it'll feed you back some answer from out there. But the truth is, it's just building predictions off of a very limited data set. And so for those whose data, those who have been on the wrong side of the digital divides that don't show up, their belief systems, their cultural values just don't show up in the mathematics. And what that means is, for instance, if you use DALL-E or one of these image generators, it'll generate very culturally specific images. So if you ask, to generate an image about a birthday or, something that someone would like, it's going to make predictions based upon what data it's been trained on. And that it'll be culturally specific in ways that will exclude those who've been on the wrong side of digital divides. One more quick one that I would say, and it's about, it's also related to this kind of the generative AI moment. And this is a wider ecosystem potential injustice. And that has to do with expanding wealth polarization and inequality. What we're seeing now at this moment is that those in the private sector who control the digital infrastructure, so the data infrastructure, the compute infrastructure, the skills infrastructure, so where are the best, engineers going, who can afford the best engineers? It's a handful of companies. It's a handful of private companies. And when you've got these systems that are displacing creative workers, doing all of these surrogate cognitive functions in the world, displacing human functions, who's going to benefit ultimately? Those who control that infrastructure. And so we are at a moment where we have to be very careful that as a society, we recognize that and we hold these, this very big possibility for further concentrations of power to account so that we don't have really unequal outcomes at the end of the day, which we're really in peril of.
You might want to move on quickly, but I'll give a quick comment to add in Remo.
I'll go very quickly. There's two brief things I want to add. Number one is we talk a lot about, let's call it exterior observables. We think about these things. One of the things that we've seen, I identify as neurodivergent. I'm at what's called aphantasic. I have no concept of visual imagery. The Aphantasia Network did a really good study of tests where they tested how popular generative AIs responded to questions about human experience. Found pretty much concretely a lot of neurodivergent thought processes, ways of linking, identifying with data completely absent, which was worrying. The second thing is, especially when we think about beyond text, is we've got to think about model feedback loops. So especially when AI is either used to train or to decide about data to collect, which comes back into its training, we can end up with runaway feedback loops. And that can exacerbate data biases extremely quickly. I know you'll be brief, so I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, this question about equity and justice and power is really interesting. I like to think of it as zoom in and zoom out. So when we zoom in, you look at the technologies themselves, you look at the data sets themselves, and subject them to critical scrutiny. And when you look at data, there are a host of well-known issues, missing data problem, who's on the data set, who's not on the data set, who's chosen not to be on the data set, and then used as an application and a debate actually about who gets to choose or who gets to decide, to come back to the original question. Now, just when you look at the technology, I think what's more interesting is to zoom out and to think about what the technologies are doing and also what patterns and trends in the outside world the technology are mirroring or reinforcing. And so that question is less about the technicalities of whether there is bias or discrimination. It's a much more political, social, economic question. It's very much at the heart of what should the role of AI be in distributing jobs, work, who gets value for what. I think in the case of things like ChatGPT, like who owns the stuff that comes from ChatGPT? That's a very political question, actually. It's an economic question. It's a question about intellectual property as much as it is a question about, discrimination. But it has serious implications for the individual for whom, that might be their entire life work that's then reproduced and collected. And we have historically focused more on the technologies themselves and less on the politics and the economics and the societal question. And give another good example of this, it's the supply chain. Actually, we seem to think of AI as this sort of slightly ethereal thing, but actually, it requires a lot in terms of physical infrastructure to have data centers, to develop AI technologies, to actually create them. And there's definitely an angle around the environment and sustainability, and also who predominantly does that work, and in what countries, and whether they are adequately recognized and remunerated for that work. And again, that is a political and a social question that extends beyond our borders as well.